Sometimes the smallest plane carries the biggest story, and sometimes the pilot everyone laughed at ends up rewriting history. They mocked her. They laughed at her tiny flights. To them, she was just a girl wasting fuel in the sky. Nothing more. She's not a real pilot, they whispered. She's not flying fighter jets. She's not making any difference, but she didn't stop. She didn't let their words clip her wings. Because she wasn't chasing their approval. She was chasing the horizon. Every time she started her little engine, she felt alive. Every time her wheels left the runway, the world below became small and her dreams became big. Up there in the open sky, she felt untouchable, free, unstoppable. The world may not have believed in her, but she believed in herself. And sometimes, that's all a person needs. Her plane was small. The wings weren't built for war. The engine wasn't built for speed. But her heart, her determination, her courage, that was built for greatness. She flew in storms. She flew in calm skies. She flew when people told her to quit. She flew when people told her it didn't matter. Because to her, every flight mattered. Every takeoff was a statement. Every landing was proof. She practiced again and again. Mistakes became lessons. Lessons became skills. Skills became confidence, and though the world laughed, she didn't hear them anymore. Because her eyes were fixed on the horizon. Because the sky was calling her name. Then came the day that would change everything. The morning looked normal. The sun rose like always. The wind was calm. The sky seemed peaceful, but radars told a different story. Screens inside NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, lit up. Something was moving. Something unusual. She didn't know it yet, but she was flying straight into history. Up in her small plane, she felt the same excitement she always did. Hands on the controls, eyes on the sky, her heart beating fast with every mile. But far away, inside NORAD's command center, voices grew tense. Eyes stayed locked on the radar. This was not routine anymore. Something was happening. For hours, NORAD had been silent, watching, analyzing, waiting. And then, suddenly, the silence broke. A voice cut through the radio, sharp, commanding, unmistakable. And in that single moment, everything changed. The same people who laughed at her. The same voices that called her useless. They would now see the truth. Because this was not just about flying. It was about courage. It was about standing tall when no one believes in you. It was about proving that strength is not always measured in size. History is not only written by the biggest jets or the loudest engines. Sometimes it is written by small wings, by tiny propellers. By a pilot who refuses to give up. Her story begins here. With doubt pressing down on her. With laughter following her. With the world ignoring her, and yet, she flew, she took off again and again. Not for them. Not for applause. But because the sky was where she belonged. People always underestimate small things. A spark can burn an entire forest. A single drop can begin a flood. And a small plane in the right hands can force even the strongest defense system in the world to break its silence. This is the story of that pilot. This is the story of that plane. And this is the story of the day NORAD itself spoke, when no one expected it to. Never laugh at small beginnings, because one day those beginnings may roar louder than the world itself. The silence of the sky was broken. NORAD had spoken. And that single transmission carried more weight than 1,000 headlines. Inside the command center, alarms were not blaring, but the tension was sharp enough to cut through steel. Every radar screen showed the same truth. A small plane was where no one expected it to be. They had tracked fighters before. They had chased intruders before. But this was different. This was not a supersonic jet. This was not an enemy bomber. This was a small, almost forgotten aircraft, and yet it forced the most powerful defense system in the world to act. Up in the cockpit, she had no idea that the eyes of NORAD were locked onto her. Her headset carried static. Her focus was on her instruments, on her altitude, on her flight path. She thought it was just another routine flight. But down below, every second of her movement was being analyzed. Her altitude, her speed, her direction, her silence on certain channels. Questions filled the air in the control room. Who is she? What is she doing there? Why wasn't this logged? It wasn't just curiosity. It was defense. Because one unknown plane in the wrong airspace could mean danger. And NORAD doesn't gamble with danger. They sent the call. The sharp voice cut through radio waves trying to reach her. Unidentified aircraft respond immediately. She froze. Her hands tightened on the controls. Her heart skipped a beat. This was not a joke. This was not normal. This was NORAD, she answered, her voice shaking but steady enough to be heard. And in that moment, her small plane was no longer invisible. She had the full attention of one of the most advanced defense commands on Earth. But why did it matter so much? Why did a little aircraft trigger such a response? Because it wasn't about the size of the plane. It was about what it represented. It represented unpredictability. It represented the unknown. And in the skies, the unknown is dangerous. A bomber can announce itself with thunder. A fighter jet can be seen from miles away, but a small plane slipping through, that is a nightmare for defense systems. Because small doesn't mean harmless. Small can mean stealth. Small can mean hidden intentions, and small can mean a threat you didn't see coming until it's too late. And so, in that single flight, she proved something no one expected, that her so-called toy plane could bring NORAD itself to attention, that her wings, no matter how light, could shake the silence of the strongest skies. The same people who once said, "She's wasting her time. She's not making a difference," now had to admit, her presence in the air mattered more than they could ever imagine. She continued to answer their calls. Her voice, once drowned by laughter, now carried weight. Now it was measured. Now it was recorded. Every word she spoke was noted by officers, by experts, by analysts. Her little flight had become part of official history. Her small plane was stamped into NORAD's records, and the truth hit her. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The moment she had unknowingly prepared for. Through every flight, every practice, every lonely hour in the air. She was no longer just a girl in a plane. She was a pilot who made the system speak. Back on the ground, stories spread. Controllers spoke of the incident. Officers discussed how quickly things had escalated, and whispers turned into respect. She was just flying small routes, they said, but she got NORAD's attention. She made them break silence, and that was the point. No one could laugh anymore. No one could mock anymore, because the sky itself had validated her. What started as ridicule turned into recognition. Her persistence, her passion, her endless hours, it had all led to this. She had proven a truth bigger than herself. That no pilot, no aircraft, no dream is ever too small to matter. Never forget this moment. Because when NORAD speaks, the world listens. And on that day, they didn't speak for a giant jet. They didn't speak for a bomber. They spoke because of her, a girl, a small plane, and a dream that refused to be ignored. Her story was no longer a secret. Her story had become history. Never underestimate what looks small, because sometimes small things force the world to open its eyes. News of the incident began to spread. It started quietly, just whispers in hallways, just murmurs between officers. But whispers have a way of growing wings, and soon people everywhere began to talk about it. The girl who flew a small plane, the pilot who once faced laughter, the same one who had forced NORAD itself to break silence. The same people who once mocked her were now telling her story. And suddenly that small cockpit, the one they said was meaningless, became the center of attention. She didn't ask for fame. She didn't seek recognition. All she ever wanted was the sky. But destiny has its own way of rewarding persistence. And now her persistence was inspiring others. Young pilots looked at her and said, "If she can do it, so can I." Parents told their children about her, saying, "Never give up, no matter how small your start may seem." And even officials, the ones who once ignored her, now used her story as an example. She herself couldn't believe how far she had come. She thought back to those lonely days of practice, when the runway lights were her only company, when the engine's hum was the only applause she got, when people rolled their eyes and said, "Why bother?" And yet she bothered. She bothered enough to show up every day. She bothered enough to keep flying, even when it felt pointless. And now that persistence had turned into power. But with recognition came responsibility. She could no longer just fly for herself. Now every flight carried weight. Every takeoff carried expectations, and deep down she wondered, was she ready for this? Could she carry the burden of being more than just a pilot? Could she be the symbol people were making her out to be? Doubt crept in again, the same way it had in the beginning. But this time the stakes were higher. While she was dealing with the weight of her new identity, something else was happening behind closed doors. Officials were debating. Analysts were writing reports. Leaders were asking questions. How did this small plane slip in? What does this say about our systems? How did one tiny aircraft trigger NORAD? And whether they admitted it or not, the answer kept circling back to her. Her persistence had not just proven herself, it had exposed weaknesses. It had forced the strongest defense system in the world to reflect. And in that reflection, people saw both risk and hope. She didn't know all this. She only knew that people were looking at her differently. For the first time, the same eyes that once rolled with laughter now looked with respect. Some even looked with envy, because she had done something others never could. She had turned mockery into recognition. She had turned doubt into proof. And she had turned silence into history. But she was human, and with all the glory came pressure. With all the respect came questions. Would she be able to live up to this new image? Could she handle the storms that were surely ahead? The sky had taught her many lessons. One of them was this: calm skies don't last forever. Storms always come. And a true pilot is not tested in clear skies but in dark ones. And soon enough the storm arrived. Because recognition attracts not just praise but also criticism. Some said she was reckless. Some said she was lucky, not skilled. Some even argued that her incident exposed more danger than courage. The laughter had stopped, but whispers of doubt still lingered in a new form. She had proven herself once, but could she prove herself again? It was here in this moment that her true test began, because the sky doesn't hand out victories for free. Every flight is a risk. Every landing is a challenge, and every pilot must decide, do you let fear control you, or do you rise above it? She chose to rise, and as she prepared for her next journey, she knew this. The world was watching now. Every takeoff mattered, every mile mattered, and every choice would either build her legacy or break it. She tightened her grip on the controls. Her eyes locked onto the horizon, and in that moment she whispered to herself, I've come this far. I can go further. Her story was no longer just about survival. It was about proving that one person, one small plane, and one unshakable dream could change the way the world looked at the sky. Never forget this lesson. Respect the small beginnings. Because they are the roots of greatness, her journey was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. She stood at the edge of the runway, the sun dipping low behind her. The sky was painted in shades of orange and violet, like it was waiting for her to rise one more time. She looked at her aircraft, the same small plane people once mocked. To outsiders, it was still just a tiny bird. But to her, it was freedom, it was resilience, it was proof. Proof that you didn't need to be the biggest to be noticed. That day when NORAD broke radio silence, she realized her journey had shifted. She was no longer the underdog, no longer the pilot people dismissed with a smirk. She was now a story, a symbol whispered in flight schools, debated in aviation forums, and retold in classrooms where young cadets dreamed of the sky. But rewind for a moment. Before all of this, there were countless nights when she doubted herself. Nights when her logbook stayed empty because weather grounded her flights. Or worse, because she didn't have the money for fuel. She watched others soar ahead while she sat on the sidelines. She smiled in public, but in private she wondered if everyone was right. Was she really wasting her time? And then she remembered. The sky doesn't judge. The clouds don't care about your plane's size. All that matters is whether you show up, whether you dare to lift off. And she always showed up. People think success comes with one big break, but her life proved otherwise. Success came from 100 small flights that no one noticed. From cold mornings when she alone pushed her plane out of the hangar. From evenings when she traced flight paths by hand because she couldn't afford new gadgets. From the silence of cockpits where only her heartbeat kept her company. And that's why the NORAD moment hit differently. Imagine, the same organization trained to monitor global threats, the one that keeps watch over America's skies every second of every day, broke their silence. Not for a jet fighter, not for a bomber. But for her, she didn't need headlines to validate her. She didn't need applause. What she needed, and what she finally received, was recognition. Recognition that her presence in the sky mattered. When the news broke, her story spread like wildfire. Journalists called her. Pilots she had never met messaged her. Even those who once mocked her came back with softened voices, pretending they had always believed in her. But she wasn't bitter. She simply nodded, smiled, and kept flying, because here's the truth she had discovered. Flying was never about them. It was never about proving the critics wrong. It was about proving herself right, about answering that small voice inside that said, "This is where you belong," in the sky. Her persistence inspired thousands. Young women who thought aviation was a closed door suddenly saw it crack open. Men who dismissed light aircraft as toys began to respect their place in the skies. And ordinary people, the kind who never stepped inside a cockpit, still felt the power of her story. Because deep down it wasn't about aviation at all. It was about life. How many times have we all been underestimated? How many times have we been laughed at for dreaming too big or, in her case, too small? How many times has silence surrounded our efforts, making us question if anyone even sees us? Her journey gave the answer. Keep going anyway. Because every great story has that moment of silence. The long, heavy pause before the world notices. Most people quit in that silence. She didn't. She refused. And because she refused, NORAD, the institution that guards a nation's skies, broke silence for her. Not because she begged, not because she demanded, but because her persistence made ignoring her impossible. The landing that followed was quiet. No flashing cameras, no cheering crowds. Just the thud of wheels meeting the runway and the soft hum of the engine winding down. She climbed out, removed her headset, and took a deep breath. Then came that smile, small, calm, powerful. A smile that didn't scream but whispered, "I told you so." Years later, that smile is still remembered. It carries weight because it wasn't born of arrogance. It was born of patience, of grit, of faith in the unseen. Her story reminds us that no dream is too small, no effort too humble, no journey too quiet. One day silence breaks. One day the world listens. So if you're watching this and you've ever been ignored, if you've ever been underestimated, if your dream feels too small to matter, remember her. Remember the sound of NORAD breaking radio silence. Remember that even the biggest powers sometimes bow to the persistence of one determined soul. And maybe, just maybe, if you keep going, the world will break its silence for you too. Greatness isn't measured by size. It's measured by courage. That is her legacy.